Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to AJ102, Introduction to Law Enforcement and Criminal Justice Online. And tonight's lecture is going to be on Chapter 6, and we are going to talk about patrol. And they call patrol the backbone of policing, and I'm pretty sure that after we're done, you'll understand why. Before we get going, a couple of quick reminders. Don't forget to take a look at those key terms that are located at the beginning of each of your chapters in the textbook, and also take the time to go through the discussion questions as well, because again, those I believe will be vital to your success when it comes to taking the quiz and the chapter exams as well. I'm going to go ahead and skip through the learning objectives like I've done in some of the other chapters, allowing you to read those at your leisure. And by way of introduction, I typically don't do this. I post some videos and things, links inside the PowerPoints and some videos at the beginning of each module. I'm sure you've noticed as you click through, when you click on the introduction tab in each module or each week, you'll see some information which might include a video, but I'm going to see if I can get one to play as part of our introduction. And as we talk about this and we talk about patrol, there are lots of perceptions out there about what police do. Now I'm just going to show you one, and I'll let you click on the next link and go through that one on your own. And I'm going to slide the screen over so you can see it.
Greetings, the name is Officer Nick Brick. I've been a cop in the LPD for about 20 years now. In that time, I've seen the good, the bad, and everything in between. We're the ones who keep this town safe and secure from the slime of villainy. Yeah, we don't really have too much trouble in Lego Town. All in all, it's Wait, whoa, what do we got here? Kids these days for the trash already. Hey, you! Me? Yeah, you. Does this can look familiar? Sorta. Sorta, eh? Well, how about you come pick it up nice and slowly? Just keep your hands where I can see them. Sir, if you do not slow down, I will use force to detain you. No, that's it. Please, sir. Well, this was a routine stop, and it's just some blood on the ground, and fortunately, it turned violent when the suspect tried to charge me. So we're taking them in for assaulting an officer. You never can know what to expect with this job.
So as we kind of go back here, and I'll slide the screen back over so it kind of gets to our presentation. So I showed you that for a couple of particular reasons. One is because it is kind of comical when you watch it, but it also should get you thinking about all of those perceptions that might be out there about what police officers really do. Now, the first link here obviously was a little bit more of some humor that you kind of put in there. The second link, when you click here, is actually going to take you to a video done by the Los Angeles Police Department, which is very, very good and well put together, that really speaks to law enforcement and those officers and how they feel about the community that they serve. But again, there's lots of different things to think about when you look at what law enforcement officers do compared to the reality of policing. And Time magazine even published a story on what it's really like to be a cop in America, because things are very difficult and they're not as easy as people might think. So I'll let you at your leisure kind of click through that and you can look at it and have a laugh. And also there's going to be some serious things that you can look at as well. So when we talk about patrol, which is really the focus of what we're going to talk about this evening, the patrol officer is considered the backbone of American policing. Now, an author by the name of Scoville, back in 2008, notes that a patrol officer and his or her associated iconology, which is a kind, like the uniform, the badge, and duty belt, and things like that, are the most emblematic of the policing profession, meaning that people see those things. And when you think about law enforcement, sometimes you think about those bigger things like their uniform and the badge and maybe what they carry and things like that. And the idea of uniformed officers patrolling the streets, we know, goes back at least to the Roman states in 400 BC, and a reliance on a visible roaming presence of law enforcement officers has carried all the way through into present day policing, largely unchanged in many different jurisdictions. In all jurisdictions, patrol truly is the most vital and, without a doubt, the most visible component of police work. And really all the other units that are built in to a police organization are basically supplemental to this larger basic unit that they call patrol. So there is no resource more valuable to an agency than its patrol officers and the core task of any police department. So, I mean, the core function of an organization, if this makes sense, is to make sure that we have first responders that get out there and that, are reactive, that respond to calls, but are also proactive as well. And that's where the patrol division comes into play. Now, patrol can contribute to each of the common goals of police departments, including preserving the peace and protecting civil rights and civil liberties, enforcing laws, preventing crime, providing services, and when I say services, that encompasses quite a bit, and then solving problems. Unfortunately, in many departments, patrol officers tend to have the position with what we might call the least amount of prestige. And I know the textbook says, well, hey, they might be the lowest paid. Well, and that's probably meant because sometimes when you're in specialized units in a department, you might get some specialized pay that goes with that. So I think sometimes we look at the patrol officers as kind of being taken for granted, if you will. And a lot of officers strive to move up in the organization or seek an area of specialization that officers can gain some enhanced pay, greater prestige, maybe some additional training, or what have you. So as we start to talk about patrol officers, kind of in a quick review here, we know that, again, this idea started, a long time ago, and truly a reliance on a visible roaming presence of law enforcement officers has carried all the way from way back then to present day. Now, they do call the patrol officer is the backbone of American policing, and the patrol division is the backbone, if you will, of any organization. And in all jurisdictions, patrol truly is the most vital and visible component of police work, because you have to think about it. Those are the men and women that are out there every single day, not just doing proactive police work, but responding to calls and enforcing traffic laws and going from here to there. And they're going to have contact with the most amount of individuals. And kind of staying with that theme for a minute, you have to understand that because they are the first ones to respond to a particular call, they also are important in a sense where they represent the organization as a whole. Let's just say that no one's ever called law enforcement before, and maybe they don't have an idea of what a law enforcement officer would look like or act like, or the level of professionalism or what have you. So that first impression that the patrol officer will make can really be the impression on that citizen of the entire organization. So it's very, very vital. Now, patrol can contribute to the common goals of the police department in many, many different ways, and we talked about some already. But, preserving the peace, protecting civil rights and liberties, enforcing the law, preventing crime, providing services, solving problems, all of these things are contributions, of course, that the patrol officers will make. Now, traditionally, patrol officers are responsible for providing what we call continuous police service and high visibility law enforcement in order to deter crime and maintain order. And most departments emphasize partnering with the community to solve problems related to crime and disorder. And we talked a little bit about that earlier in some previous chapters, because when you're talking about maybe incorporating or utilizing community policing, that's the basis for law enforcement and communities partnering together in order to solve problems related to crime, disorder, and other things that are taking place in that particular community. Now, in addition, patrol officers have to understand a lot of different things. So they have to understand the federal, the state, and the local laws. And they are sworn to uphold these laws. And not only that, they are supposed to use good judgment in enforcing these laws. So you can see that there's a lot on the shoulders of an officer that is assigned to patrols. Now, in recent years, our society has become more diverse, and many informal social controls, if you will, have broken down, and information technology has proliferated, making the patrol function increasingly complex and critical to accomplishing the police department's mission. And one other kind of side note, most officers in a police department are in fact assigned to patrol, and most of the department's overall budget is usually spent there. So again, the patrol function is the most visible form of police activity, and individual patrol officers represent the entire police department, and the tasks that they are expected to accomplish are just numerous. And if you look on page 212 and 213 in your textbook, in chapter 6, there's a table in there that actually shows kind of a lot of the functions that patrol officers might have to do. So we're not going to go through all of them, but there is that table there that kind of helps. Now, keeping with patrol officer responsibilities, patrol officers, we know, have the closest contact with the public and have the most influence on how the public perceives the police in general. The officers' specific duties are varied and, again, very complex, and can be determined by the size of the agency. So the size of the department often dictates what functions are assigned to patrol. So an example could be, if you have a small department, your patrol officers might be the first to respond to, let's say, a burglary report. They may be the same individuals that are going to interview the victims, and they may be the same person that's going to dust for prints and take photos of the crime scene and what have you, and actually work the follow-up investigation to possibly identify a suspect because perhaps the department doesn't have crime scene technicians. And if they make an arrest by chance, perhaps they would actually interview the suspect, book the suspect, and everything else, where a larger department that might have a larger detective bureau, the officer might have the detectives handle that particular portion of the crime. So you can see that the officer's specific duties are varied and complex, and again can be determined by the size of the department. Some organizations don't have a separate traffic unit, so the patrol officers also write citations. Now that happens anyway, but in larger agencies, as we've learned in previous chapters, there are typically more divisions and more specialized divisions, and the availability of additional personnel that their job is to be very specialized and focused that the patrol officer could call. In smaller agencies, they may not have that particular opportunity. So hopefully that kind of makes sense to everyone. So just kind of as a review, in most police departments, the patrol officer's responsibilities and functions are to answer a lot of different things. Non-crime calls for service, traffic control, enforce laws, make arrests, etc. And again, the specific duties involved in fulfilling these responsibilities are varied and complex, and they truly do depend on the size of the department. Now, as protectors, patrol officers promote and preserve order, respond to requests for service. They try to resolve conflicts between individuals and groups. As law enforcers, a key duty of a patrol officer is to protect constitutional guarantees. Patrol officers encourage voluntary compliance with the law and seek to reduce the opportunity for crime to be committed. They also serve an important traffic control function, which we'll talk about later in Chapter 7. And then finally, patrol officers are responsible for the safety and direction of thousands of people each day. So again, if you go back to that chart that is on page 212 and 213, you can see a lot of the different aspects of what they do. Now, I've put some up here just for us to kind of go through. So answer non-crime calls for service. People tend to call the police for a lot of different things, and a lot of those things are honestly non-criminal. But they call us anyway because we respond out there and we take control and we try to resolve problems and situations. We do traffic control, we enforce laws, make arrests, investigate crimes, prevent criminal activity, maintain order and safety at public events and gatherings, and then provide that day-to-day police service to the community. So there's a lot of information. And going back for a second, talking about issues related to protecting constitutional guarantees. This is really important. And both the Fourth and the Fifth Amendment and even the Sixth Amendment, while again, they're all very, very important, there are some big Supreme Court cases that are just huge precedent cases that I truly believe that you need to understand as detailed as you can, because you are basically bound by a lot of these cases when you work in the area of policing and courts, etc. And one of these most famous cases that I'll talk about for just a second is Miranda versus Arizona, and I have a link to a video for you to watch that, and I would highly suggest that you do this. The next one is Mapp versus Ohio. I would highly suggest that you watch that video as well. And then finally, this isn't a video, but this will take you to a case summary, if you will, about this case, Terry versus Ohio. And I think that this is another very, very important Supreme Court case that you should take a look at. So now that I've kind of given you some of the officers, you know, basic responsibilities and a couple of really cool case laws, let's talk a little bit about management of patrol operations and how do we do that in the policing realm. Well, management of patrol involves overseeing three major areas or spheres of activity. And the first would be responding to emergencies and calls for service. So you can imagine how many calls come into a dispatch center on a daily basis, and that's a large piece or sphere of activity. And the next one would be undertaking activities to apprehend suspects of crime. And the last one, engaging in strategic problem-solving partnerships with the community to address long-standing or emerging problems of crime and disorder. Now, traditionally, rapid response to calls for service has driven most departments. And we'll talk about that in a minute. The law enforcing, criminal apprehending, suspect of policing has also been a traditional focus. And the action taken by the patrol officer arriving at a crime scene is the single most important factor in the success of a criminal investigation. And we'll look at criminal investigation in a couple chapters down the way here. The third sphere of activity, partnering with the community to solve crime and disorder problems, goes full circle back to Peel's principles. And you should remember Peel, because we talked about him already, that the police are the people and the people are the police, and to an emphasis on crime prevention. Citizens are often more concerned about disorder and quality of life issues than they are about crime. And in addition to overseeing these three spheres of activity that I've talked about, middle management and first line supervisors have to balance structure and authority with discretion and creativity, attend to infrastructure requirements like training and performance evaluations and needed equipment and resources and information support, and then determine how to deploy your officers. So you can see there's a lot more to it. How do you figure out how to do all this? Now, traditionally, patrol officers have been assigned to specific time and specific geographic location, or what we call a beat. And these assignments they tend to rotate. Sometimes departments will have, you'll be in a patrol beat for 3 months or 6 months or even a year. Now, beats set up to be of similar geographic size sometimes pose a problem because the workload is not the same at all hours of the day in all areas. So a quick example of that is if you have an industrial area, a huge, let's say, industrial zone at the south end of your city, let's say, and then towards the north end into the city is more residential, and you have a patrol beat way down south and one way up north. Well, because of the fact there are residences and people all the time up north, there will more than likely be more calls for service, especially late at night when those businesses close. Does that make, it probably makes sense to you now. So that patrol beat on the south end of town where all the businesses are may not get as many calls for service, while the other patrol beat is getting hundreds of calls for service. So you can see how trying to figure out your beat assignments as well and how to evenly distribute that workload becomes very, very important. So what are some patrol techniques? We talked a little bit about beats and what have you, but let's look at some maybe strategies or techniques. Well, patrol is often categorized as either general or specialized. And both general and specialized patrol seeks to deter crime and apprehend criminals. as well as provide community satisfaction with services provided by the police organization. Now, general patrol does so by providing rapid response to calls. And specialized patrol does so by focusing on already identified problems. So let me kind of go back over that again. General patrol is also referred to as preventative patrol or random patrol and routine patrol. So there are some, different names for it. And the term routine patrol should not, we really don't like to use that because there's really no routine about it, but it's having no set pattern, if you will. And the challenges of general patrol change constantly. The patrol officer may be pursuing, let's say, an armed bank robber in the morning and giving a talk at an elementary school in the afternoon. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. We can go back here and again, so we can look at general patrol and then we can look at specialized patrol. So hopefully we've kind of got these down. So again, general patrol does so by providing rapid response to calls for service, and specialized patrol does so by focusing its efforts on already identified problems. Now, whether it's general or specialized patrol, it depends on the nature of the problem and the tactics that are necessary or required to deal with it. So if you have an area of a city that might be a lot of drug sales, it may not be a general patrol type issue. It may be more of a specialized patrol issue by focusing in on whatever the issue is. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? And then remember, general patrol also has some other names. It's also known as preventative patrol or random patrol or routine patrol, even though we don't like to use the word random. Now, in traditional patrol, officers customarily begin their shifts on random patrol in squad cars in hopes of achieving three goals: detecting or intercepting crimes in progress, deterring crime by creating an illusion of police omnipresence, meaning that people see the car driving around and maybe they're less likely to do something, or being able to provide a rapid response to crimes in progress. Now, directed patrol also has a kind of another name, and it can be referred to as aggressive patrol, and this includes things like saturation patrol, where you saturate an area with police cars and officers, or crackdowns, again, where you're saturating a neighborhood, aggressive traffic enforcement, field interrogation, and also looking at environmental type anomalies and things going on. And then another type of patrol that's in there is called an extra patrol. And this is a response in which police basically pass through an area more often during a shift, increasing their presence in this area in an effort to deter or detect criminal activity. And it happens for a couple of reasons. Typically, we use this when a specific type of crime has occurred several times in an area. So if you're having a series of burglaries in a neighborhood, you might want to, if you're the beat officer in that area, you might want to do what we call an extra patrol and drive through that area more often in order to maybe catch the criminal or deter the criminal from breaking into those vehicles. Another one, which you may not know that it kind of actually happens, would be what we call an extra patrol based on vacation. And the vacation isn't of the officer, it's of a citizen. So they can call into the department and go, hey, I'm going to be on vacation for the next week. Could you please have an officer extra patrol my house? And we would give that information to the beat officer, and also to our citizen volunteers who are out there driving around being the eyes and ears of the organization as well. And those volunteers and the officer would typically drive by that house a couple extra times per day or night or both even to check on that person's home. So that's one of the things that we would typically do for a citizen, and that's kind of the essence of extra patrol. Now, often the results of these extra patrols are based on what we call predictive analysis, meaning that we use data, and we talked about this last chapter, to figure out where things are happening. And once we get that data and we find out there's a pattern of some type of crime happening in one area, then of course we will respond accordingly and extra patrol that area. And a key to directed patrol is identifying what we call hot spots on the particular beat. And it's estimated about 10% of locations throughout cities typically account for about 60 to 65% of all calls for service. So we have these hot spots where there's gang activity or drug activity or theft activity, and we find this out by using data. And I don't know if I have a graphic of what a hotspot is, but we use crime analysis to basically identify where all the crimes are happening. And what you will see then when they put this on a graphic is the area with the most crime will basically be a red color, and that's kind of why they call it a hotspot. Well, there you have it. I guess I am smarter than I thought. So this is a map looking at the Los Angeles area, and you can see the blue would be typically places that maybe there's not as much crime, the green not as much, then yellow, and you can see more crime, and then those orangey red areas that you see, those are what we call hot spots, meaning that there are more than the average calls for service or type of criminal activity taking place at those locations. And one other really cool thing is that this type of crime mapping can be used to determine where patrol officers are basically needed. And we will use this in the police car. So the screenshot you have in front of you right here is basically something that an officer now can pull up. Not all departments have this, but some do, and the one that I came from does. You can pull up and do hotspot mapping in your own patrol car, so you don't have to depend on the crime analyst to get you this information. You can pull it up yourself. So if you look at the area right here, and I'm going to go to the middle, you can make this screen bigger, and it shows all of the different types of crimes that are happening maybe in your patrol beat. And then this is a hotspot map that shows the hotspots of criminal activity in certain areas. Now again, you don't have to have all 6 screens up, but this just shows you what you can do. You can also look at days of the week when crime is happening or calls for service. Why are we getting so many here and not as many here? And then time of day, the either calls or the criminal activity that's taking place, what time of day is it happening? So you can totally see how this is really going to help the law enforcement officer figure out on their own what's happening in their respective patrol beats. Now, quickly, I want to touch on a very interesting study, and I have the link there where you can go to it and read a little bit more. And this was called the Kansas City Patrol Experiment. And the reason I want to show it to you is because a lot of people think that, well, you know what? If we just take a bunch of police and police cars and throw them into a neighborhood, we're going to deter crime and we're going to arrest everybody and crime is going to go down. Well, no. This study, it was done in 1972, actually found that decreasing or increasing routine preventative patrol, as done in the experiment, had no real effect on crime. Now that doesn't, we're not talking about targeted efforts, okay? We're talking about routine preventative patrol. And the way they broke the study up is they had reactive beats, which were basically 5 patrol beats in which no routine preventative patrol was done. Officers responded only to calls for service in the area and then left. They had basically control beats, and those were 5 beats that maintained the normal level of routine patrol, so they did what they normally do. And then they had a third group and of patrol beats, 5 beats, that doubled and even tripled the level of preventative patrol. And again, the study found that decreasing or increasing that routine preventative patrol, as done in this experiment, had no effect on crime, citizen fear on crime, or community attitude toward the police on delivering police services relative to response time or even traffic crashes. So I'll let you take the time to read that, but again, it's a very interesting example of us using research to kind of prove if we're on target or we're doing things right. So what type of place might be a crime hotspot and why? That's kind of a discussion question, but for something to think about. So what kind of activities are done while on patrol? Well, the job of a patrol officer, and we talked about this before, has little daily routine. Activities, remember, vary from one shift to the next and run the gamut from report writing, somebody's stolen lawnmower, to handling a life and death situation. And while on patrol, officers respond to calls for service and emergencies, undertake self-initiated tasks, and also perform administrative duties. And one thing that has kind of made things a little bit better or easier compared to way back when is the two-way radio. Now, the radio has made the service call an extremely important element of patrol. It has also made it necessary for us to prioritize calls. And I'll show you why at the end. I think I have a little exercise that we're going to go through if we have time to show you what I mean by prioritizing calls. And a radio dispatch almost always takes precedent over other patrol activities. So an example of what I'm talking about would be if an officer has somebody stopped for having a headlight out, so they make a traffic stop and they're going to write them a ticket, and then they receive a call of a robbery in progress. Well, if no one else is available, that officer might have to tell the person that they stopped, hey, you can go ahead and leave, and then not write the ticket and respond to the robbery call. So if high priority calls continue to come in, dispatchers, those communications operators have to prioritize those calls. And then, which one do you handle first? And it's kind of an interesting, complex type of thing. And when we respond to calls for service, we do it in a couple of different ways. So in most police agencies, calls for service drive the department. Okay, a response known as incident-driven policing. And this is where, again, calls for service drive the department. A reactive approach with emphasis on basically rapid response. Now, because 40 to 60% of all patrol officers' time is spent responding to calls for service, the way police respond to such calls significantly affects every aspect of their function. And the response has traditionally been reactive, incident-driven, and as rapid as possible. So kind of like when calls come in, you go. And that also creates what they call, as you're looking at the lecture slide here, coming up with response strategies on how do you deal with those types of calls coming in. And then, what the CAD part you see here is called computer-aided dispatching, and pretty soon we get what is called call stacking. And I'll get to that in a second, but let me hit the second piece here. Now, many departments have found that a differential response strategy suiting the response to calls are basically much more effective. And so sometimes we will basically, that differential response strategy would be suiting the response to the call. And that's why we prioritize calls ahead of time. Each call that is pretty much known in law enforcement, they're categorized and then they're prioritized. And as these calls come up, the dispatcher knows which one might take more priority over another. Now, call management usually involves what they call call stacking, and this is a process formed by computer-aided dispatch, or CAD, that CAD system I talked about, in which non-emergency lower priority calls are ranked or held or stacked in this particular case. So the higher priorities are continually dispatched first. That makes sense to everybody? And that tends to kind of be the way most law enforcement departments work. And then on top of this responding to calls for service and the incident-driven policing and the differential strategies and call stacking, we have what we call self-initiated tasks. And this is where these are officer observations. And this usually results from the officer's observations while on preventative or directive patrol. They encounter some situation that requires their intervention, like maybe they see a crime in progress or something like that. Now, too often, little attention is paid to the officer's use of what they call non-committed time, which is commonly regarded as having no function other than ensuring that officers are available to quickly respond to calls for service. Now, frequently, non-crime service calls interrupt a patrol officer's self-initiated activity that could prevent or deter crime. So does that make sense to everyone? So there's, again, non-committed time is where you're not answering a call, you're not doing, you're not responding to a call, and you're even not doing this thing down here, the administrative things. You're not writing a report, you're not maintaining your patrol car, you're not testifying in court, you're driving around on patrol. And what they're saying is that sometimes these little non-crime calls that come in take you away from your ability to do the self-initiated tasks, like driving around looking for crime and deterring crime, which is what you're supposed to be doing. So I think that kind of explains it okay. And then again, at the bottom, don't forget another thing that we do is we do have administrative duties. We do prepare and maintain our patrol car, and we do write reports, and we do have to testify in court and things like that. So there are a lot of other things that kind of go on. Well, now here's the beat thing that I talked about. So I think I may have thrown it in there. I'm not sure to what degree, but let me take a look. So when you look at patrol beats, this would be one in Rialto, and we had broken down our beat system into 4 large beats, all typically about the same size. And the way that the city was laid out, we kind of got lucky because the amount of crime that happened in each beat or calls for service was typically pretty well divided all the way through. So this is an example of patrol beats. And then I'm going to put my little police cars in here. So let's say on a typical day, on a slow day, we might have 2 cars in beat 1, 2 cars in 2, 2 cars in 3, and 2 cars in area 4. So that's just kind of an example of what a patrol beat looks like, and then I'll show you a little bit more about how we respond in a second, and I think I'm going to have time to do it. So quickly, let's cover methods of patrol. And you can look at the pictures here, and they're another factor influencing how patrol officers fulfill their responsibility is the method by which they patrol. And patrol officers in the United States were originally on foot and horseback. Why? Because we didn't have cars. We had horses back then. And then bicycles were introduced to policing in Detroit back in about 1897, I believe, and the automobiles were introduced in 1910, and airplanes were first used by the New York City Police Department in 1930. So you can see, again, there's a lot of different things we can use. So let's talk about some quickly. We won't spend a lot of time. Foot patrol. Well, the word patrol is derived from the French word patrouille, which roughly means to travel on foot. Now, foot patrol is the oldest form of patrol, and it consists of officers walking a beat and responding to incidents on foot. Now, it has advantages of that close citizen contact and is proactive rather than reactive, and the goal is to address neighborhood problems before they become crimes. And there's a famous experiment out there that we're not going to have time to go over, but it's called the Philadelphia Foot Patrol experiment, and it earned attention for its focus on what we call place-based policing. And if you have the time, it would be pretty cool for you to maybe look that up. And then automobile patrol, well, that offers the greatest mobility and flexibility and usually the most cost-effective method of patrol. It allows a wide coverage and rapid response to calls, and the vehicle radio, like I talked about earlier, provides instant communication with headquarters, and the automobile also provides a means of transporting special equipment and prisoners and things like that. However, while patrolling in a car, officers can't really pay as much attention to detail as probably they could while they're on foot or something like that. So, and just the physical act of driving sometimes takes your attention away a little bit. And I'm not going to go through the modern patrol car and talk about that, but you saw at the beginning the modern patrol car, and you can look at this guy's patrol car right here with the touch screen, and you can type your reports and all kinds of cool stuff in there. So it's kind of like your office on wheels. Really quick, what about one officer versus two officer cars? And that kind of comes up every once in a while. Well, one factor of importance when using vehicle patrol is whether to have one or two officers in the car. Now, circumstances should determine whether a one or two officer unit is more appropriate. The single officer unit is basically the rule rather than the exception. And one officer vehicles can handle most incidents, not all, but most. If two or more officers are required, multiple one-officer units can be dispatched to the scene. Two officer units should be restricted to those areas, shifts, and type of activities most likely to threaten officer safety. For example, maybe during the evening or in high crime areas. And I'll let you look at some other reasons. Police unions tend to support two officer units, but they also understand that one officer units are in fact more cost effective, etc. What about motorcycles? Well, they've been used in American policing for more than half a century. In fact, motorcycle officers have patrolled our streets since their introduction in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, almost 100 years ago. And typically, motorcycles are used for traffic enforcement, escorts, parades, and things like that. Bike patrol, again introduced by Detroit PD in 1897 and have enjoyed great popularity until around 1910 when the car came around, and then the emphasis on rapid response kind of took over and the bikes kind of went away. Well, they are making a comeback. Many organizations have bike patrol programs. In fact, they've increased their bike patrol programs. They're great for community policing tools. They're relatively inexpensive compared to maintaining cars. You can patrol parks and beaches and have that community events and parades and fairs. And they've been very successful on college campuses and looking for missing kids and all kinds of different things. Segways, I don't have a lot of experience to speak of on that, but it's a relatively new method of patrol. The Segway personal transporter, more commonly just referred to as a Segway, introduced in about December of 2001 as somewhat of a solution to the foot patrol officers' limited ability to get from one area to another quickly. Mounted patrol, well, that's kind of on horseback. And that evolved from the military and basically comprises some of the oldest and most varied police units in the United States. In 1871, the New York City Police Department was one of the first agencies in the country to establish a mounted patrol. And they function in a variety of ways. They do raise visibility, encourage public interaction in a positive way, like most animals tend to do. An officer on horseback does command authority, so they can be used for crowd control and things like that. Air patrol, that kind of speaks for itself. Another highly effective form of patrol when trying to respond to things in a large geographic area. Whether you're looking for lost persons or those types of crimes, most of you have seen police helicopters that are out there, and they are great for not just special operations like SWAT and things like that, but they're good for responding to an area where a crime might be taking place, kind of a hot call, robberies, auto thefts, burglaries in progress, and they can get there very quickly and use their FLIR, which is night vision, or the spotlight, to kind of beam down to the ground to see if they can see anything. And then in car chases, they can follow suspects in vehicles quite a bit more safely, of course, than somebody pursuing someone on the ground. Water patrol kind of speaks for itself, used extensively on our coast to apprehend weapons, narcotics, deal with smuggling. We also have these patrols on rivers and lakes. Special terrain could be like for beaches and areas like that, mountains, beaches, or what have you. Now, we talked about the one officer car versus two officer cars, so I'm not going to kind of go through that again, but I did have a slide there for it. One real quick thing before we move on to traffic would be what we call the combination. And combination patrol provides the most versatile approach to preventing or detecting or deterring crime and apprehending criminals. So the combination used, of course, will depend on the size of the police department and the circumstances that arise, but one of the most common would be foot patrol and vehicle patrol. So you kind of combine the two. Foot patrol might be downtown, in a downtown area, and vehicle patrol might be, kind of on the outskirts or what have you. And then high visibility versus low visibility. Well, high visibility patrol is often used in the high risk areas in hopes of deterring criminal activity. In addition, high visibility patrol gives citizens a sense of safety, justified or not. And the methods could be any of those things we just talked about. Could be foot patrol, could be car patrol, or motorcycle patrol, or air. And low visibility patrol is often used to apprehend criminals engaged in like what we call targeted crimes. And many of the specialized functions or areas in the department will use that low visibility, like unmarked cars to drive through gang neighborhoods so you're not obviously recognized as law enforcement, or doing surveillance, or following individuals and things like that. So does that kind of make sense? And on page 233 in your textbook, there is a summary of different patrol methods that you could take a look at as well. So moving on, because we need to kind of get through the traffic part here. And yes, one thing that police chiefs don't like is when your car looks like this. So this is a brand new off the lot Rialto police car that a drunk driver happened to crash into, and it makes a police chief very, very sad. But yeah, I mean, another reason for traffic to deal with those kinds of impaired drivers on the roadway. So traffic enforcement is the most frequent contact between police and otherwise law-abiding citizens. And traffic enforcement is a critical responsibility of officers and is often met with mixed reaction from the community. Now, it's favorable when the police stop the neighborhood speeders and people playing their music too loud and things like that, or running through the stop signs, or when you take your kid to school and somebody's double parked in the red, etc. Now, it's negative when that particular citizen is the subject of the actual traffic stop or traffic enforcement. So you can see how that can kind of come into play. Now, The primary goal of traffic law enforcement is to produce voluntary compliance with traffic laws while keeping traffic moving smoothly. And a substantial, this is important right here, a substantial number of crimes are stopped or discovered by police enforcing traffic in a proactive way. So traffic is one of the best crime fighting tools in the police arsenal. And the way I'm kind of saying that is that because traffic officers are out there proactive, because their job is to enforce those laws, and there are plenty of violators out there, and we want to produce voluntary compliance, so we're stopping a lot of cars. As we stop them, we tend to discover other types of criminal activity. So I think that kind of makes sense. So the more vehicles that you stop, probably the higher rate or amount of individuals involved in other type of illegal activity you may come across. And then sometimes we may do selective enforcement. So traffic officers will go out and enforce the laws, again, looking for voluntary compliance, and they'll drive around the city and they'll hit certain places. But a lot of times we'll do what we call selective enforcement, which means that we're targeting specific crash areas or crash sites. So if there's an intersection in your city where people keep running red lights, or somebody keeps speeding, or in front of schools where people speed, we will go out and do what is called selective enforcement in order to get people into that compliance. So selective enforcement means to basically target specific crashes or high crime areas or things that people are doing. Now, a couple of stats that are a little scary. There were 32,675 traffic fatalities in the United States in 2014. And criminals are 5 times more likely to be involved in a traffic crash. Speeding contributes to 28% of all fatal crashes. Red light running killed 697 people in 2013. And then you can see work zone fatalities. And then alcohol-related crashes claimed on an average 1 life every 53 minutes in 2014. And that's a lot. So we have to really, kind of understand this whole issue on impaired driving. So, and there's a program out there that I don't know if I put in the slide presentation called the Every 15 Minutes program, that is a great school-based program for high school seniors on the dangers of driving while impaired. And if you want to see some good video on it, you could always Google, you could Google Rialto Police Department Every 15 Minutes program, and you can pull up some of their programs and watch them, and they are extremely emotional and moving, to say the least. So in order to reduce these instances, if you will, of impaired driving and getting them off the road, we use things that are considered like saturation patrols. And those involve an increased enforcement effort targeting a specific geographic area, often during targeted times like maybe New Year's Eve or 4th of July, to identify and arrest impaired drivers. And then a lot of times there are checkpoints. Many states use sobriety checkpoints, which are supported by research to be the most immediate method to drive down deaths and injuries from DUIs, to deter driving while under the influence of alcohol. And these checkpoints have been used for the past 25 years in the United States, and also have withstood numerous legal challenges. And in a big case, in Michigan Department of State Police versus SITS in 1990, the Supreme Court ruled that sobriety checkpoints are constitutional because the states have a substantial interest in keeping intoxicated drivers off of the road, because of the measure of intrusion on motorists stopped at sobriety checkpoints is in fact very slight. And then you have new technologies for police officers to identify drunk drivers and and separate them from their vehicles. Things like PAS devices or passive alcohol sensors or remote alcohol monitor devices that don't allow you to start your car until you breathe into the device. So lots of different things that are out there. And if I have the time, I'm going to get to what we call pretext stop. Okay, so we're going to talk about it right now. So an important issue related to the traffic stop is the charge of using the stop as an excuse to stop a vehicle for some unrelated reason. And this is often associated with profiling. Police are sometimes accused of making what we call a pretext stop, also called a dual motive stop, using a traffic stop as an excuse to execute another agenda, like searching a car or driver for drugs. Now the question arises here on a pretext stop: is the temporary detention of a motorist whom the police believe has committed a traffic violation constitutional under the Fourth Amendment if the officer in fact really had some other objective in mind? Meaning, like, they saw the violation, so there's an actual vehicle code violation, but they really wanted to stop them because they know they're selling drugs, so they want to see if they can maybe somehow look for some other evidence. Are they allowed to do that? And I'll give you a second to kind of think about it. Well, in this case, Wren versus United States in 1996, and I put the little link to a case there so you can make it easier. The court said this: well, the test for validity and constitutionality of a stop is not whether the officers would have made the stop, but rather whether the officers could have made the stop. So the answer to that is yes, the law says that, you know what, even if we're stopping for something else, we can still stop as long as we have the vehicle code violation, which is it's a valid stop. Okay, so quickly, pretext stop: when an officer stops a vehicle for an ulterior motive. It's also called a dual motive stop. Racial profiling: any police-initiated action that relies on the race, ethnicity, or national origin rather than on the behavior of an individual for the police to believe a particular individual is engaged in criminal activity. And for stopping a car, an infraction is criminal activity. It's a violation of law. That kind of help everybody out? So what about DUI enforcement? Just a little bit more. So implied consent laws or basically state that any person driving a motor vehicle is deemed to have consented to a chemical blood test if they're arrested while intoxicated. Now, refusing to take this test is also a crime. And again, we talked about these different new technologies that are out there as well. So I want to kind of get going so we can finish up. An average of 90 people died each day in motor vehicle crashes in 2014, and one every 16 minutes. Now, caused by human fault, errors, violations, attitudes, road defects, and vehicle defects. And the responsibilities of an officer called to a crash scene, of course, the first one would be life-saving, saving the lives of those for medical reasons and things like that. And then, of course, taking a crash report. And now we actually have really cool software, and you can look down at the bottom there, where we can, instead of hand sketching these sketches, we can actually do computerized crash reconstruction. And it's kind of a really cool thing where we can recreate an entire crash, even animated. We can recreate it. So what do you think is the single most worrisome cause of traffic crashes? And how can we prevent it? So that really that walks us through Chapter 6. I know it was a lot of information, but we made it just about a little over the 60-minute mark. So that, again, will conclude Chapter 6. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them on the discussion board. If you don't want to put it there, you can send me an email. And don't forget about the student resources, the key terms at the beginning of the chapter, and the discussion questions at the end of each chapter. And that will be it until next time.